Sarah Mitchell pressed her back against the rough bark of the pine tree, her breath coming in short gasps. The Oregon wilderness stretched endlessly around her, a maze of towering trees and rocky outcroppings that had swallowed her whole 3 days ago. Her water bottle had been empty since yesterday morning, and the granola bars in her backpack were nothing but crumbs now. She had come to the Cascade Mountains seeking solitude after losing her job, her apartment, and what she thought was the love of her life, all within the same devastating month. The hiking trail was supposed to clear her head, give her perspective. Instead, she had taken a wrong turn somewhere near Crater Lake and found herself completely lost in territory she didn't recognize. The forest sounds seemed different here, wilder somehow. She had heard stories about this region, whispers of Native American lands that tourists rarely visited. Her phone had lost signal 2 days ago, and the GPS device she'd borrowed from her friend had died when she dropped it crossing a stream. Sarah's legs trembled as she stood up, forcing herself to keep moving despite the hopelessness creeping into her thoughts. Every direction looked the same now. Every tree, every rock formation, every winding deer path seemed to mock her with its familiarity. She was walking in circles, and she knew it. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah felt the last of her strength ebbing away. She had always prided herself on being independent, capable, strong. Growing up in foster care had taught her to rely only on herself. But here, surrounded by miles of untamed wilderness, her self-reliance felt like a cruel joke. The temperature was dropping fast. Sarah knew that without shelter, without warmth, she might not survive another night. She had tried to build a fire the previous evening, but failed miserably. The matches she carried were down to just 3, and she couldn't afford another failure. A strange sound caught her attention, something that didn't belong to the natural symphony of the forest. It was rhythmic, almost musical. As she listened more carefully, she realized it was the sound of someone chopping wood. Hope flared in her chest like a sudden flame. Following the sound through a dense thicket of undergrowth, Sarah emerged into a small clearing where smoke rose from what appeared to be a traditional dwelling. The structure was unlike anything she had seen before, built with natural materials that seemed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding forest. A man worked near the dwelling, his movements efficient and practiced as he split logs with a well-worn axe. His long black hair was tied back, and his weathered hands spoke of years spent living close to the land. He wore simple clothes, practical and sturdy, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Sarah hesitated at the edge of the clearing, uncertain whether to approach. She had heard varying stories about encounters with Native American communities, some welcoming, others preferring isolation from outsiders. Her desperate situation left her little choice, however. As if sensing her presence, the man looked up from his work. Their eyes met across the clearing, and Sarah saw no hostility there, only a careful assessment. He set down his axe and waited, neither advancing nor retreating, simply acknowledging her presence with a dignity that made her feel both grateful and humbled. Before Sarah could find her voice to speak, a small figure emerged from the dwelling. A child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with the same dark hair as the man and bright, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything about this unexpected visitor. Sarah raised her hand in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "Please, I'm lost. I need help." The man studied Sarah for a long moment before nodding toward a log near the fire. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if rushing was a concept foreign to this place. The child stayed close to his father's side, watching Sarah with open curiosity rather than fear. "Sit," the man said simply, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed not through force but through natural authority. "You are far from any trail." Sarah's legs nearly gave out as she sank onto the offered seat. The warmth from the fire felt like salvation against her chilled skin. She noticed now that her hands were shaking, not just from cold but from the relief of finally finding human contact after days of isolation. "I'm Sarah," she managed, her voice hoarse from dehydration. "I was hiking near Crater Lake and took a wrong turn. I've been walking for 3 days." The man disappeared into the dwelling and returned with a cup made from carved wood. The water inside was clean and cold, tasting better than anything Sarah had ever experienced. She drank deeply, fighting the urge to drain it completely, "I am Joseph," he said, settling onto another log across from her. "This is my son, Daniel." The child smiled shyly at the mention of his name, still clutching something in his small hands. Sarah noticed the boy's grip on what appeared to be a small wooden bow, expertly crafted and sized perfectly for his young hands. It wasn't a toy but a real implement smooth from use and care. "You are in Modoc territory," Joseph continued, stirring the fire with a long stick. "Not many hikers find their way here. The old paths are known only to us." The significance of his words wasn't lost on Sarah. She had wandered far from the marked trails, into lands that held deep cultural and spiritual meaning for the Modoc people. She felt both grateful for their hospitality and acutely aware of her position as an uninvited guest. As darkness settled over the clearing, Joseph prepared a simple meal of fish and wild vegetables. The food was unlike anything Sarah had tasted, seasoned with herbs she couldn't identify, but that seemed to restore strength to her weary body. The child Daniel gradually warmed to her presence, showing her his bow and demonstrating how he held it. "My grandfather made this," Daniel told her proudly, his young voice clear in the firelit evening. "He taught my father, and my father teaches me. It is our way." Joseph watched his son with obvious pride, but also with something deeper, a sadness that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. As the fire burned lower, she began to understand that their small family unit felt incomplete somehow. "Where is Daniel's mother?" Sarah asked gently, then immediately regretted the personal question. Joseph was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and heavy with loss. "She died 2 winters ago. Sickness came to our people and not all survived. Since then, it has been just Daniel and me." The weight of his grief was palpable in the growing darkness. Sarah understood now the source of the sadness she had sensed. This man was raising his son alone, carrying the burden of preserving their traditions and culture while dealing with his own loss. Daniel moved closer to his father, as if sensing the shift in mood. The boy's small hand found Joseph's larger one, and they sat together in comfortable silence that spoke of shared understanding and mutual dependence. Sarah felt like an intruder in this moment of quiet intimacy, yet she also sensed that her presence wasn't unwelcome. There was something in the way Joseph looked at her, a consideration that went beyond simple hospitality toward a stranger. As the fire died down to glowing embers, Joseph offered Sarah a place to sleep in a small alcove within their dwelling. The space was warm and dry, filled with hand-woven blankets that smelled of sage and wood smoke. For the first time in days, Sarah felt truly safe. But along with safety came an unexpected emotion, something she hadn't felt in months of disappointment and failure. She felt needed here, useful in a way that her old life had never provided. As she drifted toward sleep, she could hear the quiet conversation between father and son in their native language, words she didn't understand but that carried the melody of family and tradition, continuing despite loss and hardship. Sarah woke to the sound of Daniel's laughter echoing through the morning air. Sunlight filtered through the dwelling's opening, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the woven walls. For a moment she forgot where she was, the familiar sounds of her old life rushing back before reality settled in. She emerged to find father and son engaged in what appeared to be a hunting lesson. Daniel held his bow with serious concentration, while Joseph guided his small hands, showing him proper form and technique. The scene was both tender and purposeful, a glimpse into how knowledge passed from one generation to the next in this timeless place. "You slept well," Joseph observed as Sarah approached the fire where coffee made from roasted roots was brewing in a metal pot. The beverage was strong and earthy, nothing like the expensive lattes she used to buy every morning in her former life. "Better than I have in months," Sarah admitted, surprised by the truth of her words. Despite sleeping on the ground in unfamiliar surroundings, she felt more rested than she had since her life began falling apart. Daniel ran over to her with his bow, eager to show off what he had learned. "My father says I am getting better," he announced proudly. "Soon I will be able to hunt small game to help feed us." The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah found herself genuinely interested in his progress. She had never been around children much, but Daniel's natural curiosity and openness made conversation easy. "Would you like to try?" Joseph asked, offering Sarah a larger bow. "It is good to learn the old skills. The modern world does not always provide what we need." Sarah's first attempts were clumsy and embarrassing. The arrows flew wild, missing the target completely and sending Daniel into fits of giggles. But Joseph was patient, adjusting her stance and grip with gentle corrections until she managed to hit the edge of the target. "Better," he said simply, but his approval felt more meaningful than any praise she had received in her corporate job. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself helping with various tasks around their small homestead. She gathered firewood with Daniel, learned to identify edible plants under Joseph's guidance, and helped prepare meals using traditional methods. Her hands, soft from office work, began to adapt to the rougher demands of this life. During a quiet moment while Daniel napped in the afternoon sun, Joseph shared more about their way of life. He spoke of the delicate balance required to live in harmony with the land, of traditions that stretched back countless generations, and of the challenges facing his people in the modern world. "Many of our young people leave for the cities," he explained, his voice carrying both understanding and sadness. "They seek opportunities that do not exist here. But something is lost when the old ways are forgotten." Sarah understood his dilemma. She had seen how the pursuit of success in the outside world could leave people empty and disconnected, herself included. Here, surrounded by the simplicity and authenticity of Joseph and Daniel's life, her former priorities seemed hollow and meaningless. "What will happen to Daniel?" she asked, watching the sleeping child who looked so peaceful in the dappled sunlight. "He will choose his own path when the time comes," Joseph replied. "I can only teach him what I know and hope it serves him well." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Daniel surprised Sarah with a question that seemed far too mature for his young age. "Do you have children of your own?" he asked while helping her tend the fire. "No," Sarah answered, feeling the familiar pang of regret that had intensified after her recent breakup. "I always thought I would someday, but life didn't work out that way." Daniel considered this seriously, his young face thoughtful in the firelight. "My father is lonely sometimes," he said, with the startling honesty that only children possess. "I think he misses having someone to talk to besides me." Sarah glanced at Joseph, who was focused on preparing fish for their meal. If he had heard his son's observation, he gave no indication of it. But she noticed the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, the careful way he moved through routines that had once been shared with another. After dinner, as they sat around the fire sharing stories, Sarah found herself opening up about her own struggles and disappointments. She told them about losing her job due to company downsizing, about the relationship that ended when her boyfriend decided he wanted someone more ambitious, about the constant feeling that she was falling behind in a race she didn't even want to run. Joseph listened without judgment, his presence offering a kind of acceptance she had rarely experienced. Daniel asked thoughtful questions that showed he was trying to understand her world, even though it was so different from his own. As the fire burned low and Daniel began to yawn, Sarah realized that for the first time in months she felt genuinely content. The simplicity of their evening routine, the honest conversation, the sense of belonging somewhere, all combined to create a peace she had forgotten was possible. But beneath her contentment lay a growing awareness that this interlude couldn't last forever. Soon she would need to return to civilization, to face the wreckage of her old life and somehow rebuild it into something meaningful. On her fourth day with Joseph and Daniel, Sarah began to feel the pull of the outside world creeping back into her consciousness. She knew that people would eventually start looking for her, that responsibilities waited beyond this peaceful clearing. But each time she mentioned leaving, something held her back. Daniel had become attached to her presence, following her around like a shadow and chattering about everything from the habits of local wildlife to stories his grandfather used to tell. The boy's need for maternal attention was obvious, though he tried to hide it behind his serious demeanor when helping his father. "Sarah knows about many things," Daniel told his father over breakfast, spooning wild berry preserves onto flatbread baked on hot stones. "She told me about flying machines that carry people across the sky, and buildings so tall they touch the clouds." Joseph smiled at his son's enthusiasm, but Sarah caught the flicker of concern in his eyes. She was bringing the outside world into their sanctuary, introducing ideas that might make Daniel restless with their simple life. "All places have their own kind of magic," Sarah said carefully, trying to balance honesty with sensitivity. "The city has wonders, but nothing as beautiful as what you have here." Later, while Daniel practiced with his bow, Joseph approached Sarah with a serious expression. You speak truth to my son, but I see sadness in your eyes when you think we are not watching. What troubles you about returning to your world? Sarah found herself confessing fears she had barely admitted to herself. The job market was brutal. Her savings were nearly gone, and the thought of starting over in her 30s felt overwhelming. Worse, she had begun to question whether the life she had been living was worth returning to at all. I spent so many years chasing things that were supposed to make me happy, she admitted. The right job, the right relationship, the right apartment in the right neighborhood. But I never felt as peaceful as I do here. Joseph listened with the same patient attention he gave to everything else. Peace is not found in places, he said eventually. It is found in knowing who you are and what truly matters. His words stayed with her as they worked together that afternoon, harvesting late-season plants that would be dried and stored for winter. Sarah marveled at the depth of knowledge required to live this way, the intimate understanding of natural cycles and seasonal rhythms that Joseph possessed. As evening approached, Daniel grew unusually quiet. He sat by the fire whittling a piece of wood with careful concentration, his young face serious beyond his years. When Sarah asked what he was making, he simply smiled and said it was a surprise. After dinner, as they settled into their usual evening routine of stories and conversation, Daniel suddenly stood up with nervous energy. He clutched his finished carving in his hands, looking between his father and Sarah with an expression of determination mixed with uncertainty. I made something, he announced, his voice slightly higher than usual. He approached Sarah and placed a small wooden figure in her hands. It was beautifully crafted despite its simple form, clearly recognizable as a woman with long hair and outstretched arms. It is you, Daniel explained, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment and pride. So you will remember us when you go back to the tall buildings. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she examined the careful workmanship. For a child his age to have such skill spoke to hours of patient instruction and practice. But more than the craftsmanship, it was the thoughtfulness behind the gift that moved her. Daniel, this is beautiful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I will treasure it always. The boy beamed at her reaction, but then his expression grew serious again. He glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly, before turning back to Sarah with an intensity that seemed far too mature for his young face. I have been thinking, Daniel said slowly, choosing his words with care. My father is a good man, and he is lonely even though he tries to hide it. You are kind, and you make him smile more than usual. Sarah felt her heart begin to race. Sensing where this conversation might be heading, Joseph remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable in the firelight. Daniel took a deep breath and continued with the straightforward honesty that characterized everything he said. You fit here with us like you belong, and my father needs someone who understands both worlds, the old ways and the new. The child paused, clutching his small bow as if it gave him courage, before delivering the question that would change everything. Will you wed my father? The words hung in the air like smoke from the fire, impossible to take back or ignore. Sarah felt the earth shift beneath her, not from any physical movement but from the weight of what Daniel was asking. She looked at Joseph, searching his face for some indication of how he felt about his son's unexpected proposal. Joseph's expression remained composed, but Sarah could see something vulnerable in his eyes, a careful hope that he was trying to conceal. He had not put Daniel up to this, she realized. This was entirely the child's idea, born from his observation of the adults around him and his desire for the family completeness he had lost. The silence stretched between them, filled with the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the nighttime forest. Sarah's mind raced through 1,000 thoughts and implications, but underneath the chaos, one truth emerged with startling clarity. She was happier here, in this simple clearing with this man and his son, than she had been anywhere else in years. The weight of Daniel's questions settled over the clearing like morning mist. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she struggled to find words that wouldn't hurt this earnest child, while still honoring the complexity of what he was asking. Joseph finally broke the silence, his voice gentle but firm. Daniel, such decisions cannot be made quickly, he said, though his eyes never left Sarah's face. Sarah has a life in the outside world, responsibilities and people who care about her. But Daniel, with the persistence that only children possess when they believe something deeply, shook his head. She told us her life there made her sad. Here she laughs and her eyes are bright. Why would someone choose sadness over happiness? The simplicity of his logic was both devastating and profound. Sarah realized that from Daniel's perspective, the choice was obvious. In his world, people did what made sense for survival and happiness. The complications that adults created around love and commitment were foreign concepts to him. "It's not that simple, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, kneeling down to Daniel's level. "Your father and I barely know each other. Marriage is about much more than just being happy together for a few days." "But you could know each other," Daniel insisted, his young voice filled with conviction. "My grandfather told me stories about how people chose partners in the old days. They watched how someone treated others, how they worked, how they faced difficulties. You have already shown us who you are." Joseph stood and moved to his son's side, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "Daniel speaks from his heart, but he does not understand all the complexities involved. Sarah, please do not feel pressured by a child's innocent wishes." Yet even as Joseph spoke these sensible words, Sarah could see in his eyes that Daniel's proposal had awakened something he had kept carefully buried. There was longing there, not just for companionship, but for the possibility of rebuilding the family life that illness had stolen from them. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the stars visible through the dwelling's opening. Daniel's wooden carving rested in her palm, worn smooth by her nervous fidgeting. She thought about her empty apartment back in Portland, the stack of rejection letters on her desk, the phone that rarely rang with anything but bill collectors and automated messages. Then she thought about the past few days. The satisfaction of learning to shoot a bow, the peaceful rhythm of gathering firewood, the way Daniel's face lit up when she helped him with some small task. The quiet strength in Joseph's presence, his patient way of teaching without condescension, the glimpses of humor that emerged when he forgot to guard his emotions. Most surprisingly, she thought about how natural it felt to be here, as if some part of her had been waiting her entire life to find this place and these people. Morning brought no easy answers. Sarah helped with the daily routines, but her mind remained turbulent. Joseph seemed to sense her internal struggle and gave her space while remaining quietly supportive. Daniel, meanwhile, continued his campaign with the subtlety of a 7-year-old, pointing out every moment of compatibility between his father and their guest. "See how Sarah knows to add the sage without being told?" he observed during lunch preparation. "And how she already knows which wood burns best for cooking? She learns our ways quickly because they feel right to her." By afternoon, Sarah knew she needed to address the situation directly. While Daniel napped, she approached Joseph where he sat mending a piece of fishing net with practiced efficiency. "We need to talk about what Daniel asked," she said, settling beside him on the fallen log that served as their outdoor workspace. Joseph's hand stilled on the net. "I apologize for putting you in an uncomfortable position. Daniel has been without a mother figure for so long that he perhaps sees solutions where none exist." "But what if a solution does exist?" Sarah asked quietly. "What if Daniel sees something that we adults are too complicated to recognize?" Joseph looked at her with surprise, his composed facade slipping slightly. "Sarah, you cannot be serious. You have known us for less than a week. Your entire life is in the outside world." "My entire life was falling apart in the outside world," Sarah corrected. "Joseph, I need to be honest with you. I haven't felt this much like myself, this much at peace since I was a child. Being here with you and Daniel feels more real than anything I've experienced in years." They sat in silence as Joseph processed her words. Around them, the forest continued its eternal rhythms, indifferent to human complications. "Even if such feelings are genuine," Joseph said eventually, "you do not understand what you would be choosing. This life is hard, isolated. We have little contact with the outside world, few modern conveniences. In winter, we sometimes go weeks without seeing another soul. And in the outside world, I went months without a genuine conversation," Sarah replied. "Joseph, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but Daniel asked an important question, and I think it deserves a real answer, not just a dismissal." Joseph set down his mending and turned to face her fully. For the first time since they had met, she saw him without his careful control, saw the man underneath the responsibilities and traditions he carried. "If you are truly considering this," he said slowly, "then you need to understand what it would mean. Our way of life, our beliefs, our connection to this land, these are not things you can try on like new clothes. They become part of who you are permanently." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. "Then teach me," she said simply. "Help me understand what I would be choosing." The following weeks transformed Sarah's understanding of everything she thought she knew about life, love, and belonging. Joseph took her request seriously, beginning an intensive education in not just the practical skills of their way of life, but the deeper philosophical and spiritual foundations that guided every decision. He taught her to read the weather patterns in cloud formations and wind direction, to identify the subtle signs that indicated the health of the forest ecosystem. She learned the stories behind their traditions, the careful balance between taking from the land and giving back to it, the complex relationships between all living things that formed the core of Modoc understanding. Daniel became her eager assistant and teacher, proud to share his knowledge with someone who approached it with genuine respect and interest. Under his guidance, Sarah's archery improved dramatically, and she began to understand why the skill was about much more than simply hitting a target. It is about knowing yourself, Daniel explained with the seriousness he brought to all important matters. My grandfather said that the arrow cannot fly straight if the person holding the bow is crooked inside. More challenging than the practical skills was learning to live without the constant connectivity that had defined her previous existence. No internet, no cell phone, no news updates or social media notifications. At first, the silence felt overwhelming, but gradually Sarah began to appreciate the mental space that opened up when her attention wasn't constantly fragmented. She started to notice details that had escaped her before. The way morning light changed color as it filtered through different types of leaves, the subtle variations in bird songs that indicated weather changes, the satisfaction of preparing food that she had helped gather herself. Joseph watched her progress with careful attention, neither encouraging nor discouraging her interest in their way of life. He answered her questions honestly, including the difficult ones about loneliness, the challenges of medical emergencies far from hospitals, the reality of conflict with outside authorities over land rights and resource management. You must understand, he told her one evening as they prepared for the approaching winter, that choosing this life means accepting uncertainty and hardship along with the peace and beauty. There are no guarantees, no safety nets beyond what we create for ourselves. Sarah appreciated his honesty even as it forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her own motivations. Was she genuinely drawn to this way of life, or was she simply running away from her failures in the modern world? The distinction mattered, not just for her own integrity but for the welfare of Joseph and Daniel. The answer came during an early snowstorm that caught them partially unprepared. Sarah worked alongside Joseph through the night, securing their food stores and reinforcing their shelter against the unexpected weather. There was no time for self-doubt or philosophical reflection, only the immediate demands of survival. When dawn broke over a landscape transformed by fresh snow, Sarah realized that she had functioned as a full partner throughout the crisis. She hadn't needed to be told what to do or how to help. The knowledge had come naturally, as if she had always known how to respond to such challenges. You did well last night, Joseph said simply, as they shared breakfast in the warm interior of their dwelling. You have good instincts for this life. It was the closest thing to approval he had given her, and Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling nearby. Daniel, meanwhile, had been watching the developing relationship between his father and Sarah with the satisfaction of someone whose plan was working perfectly. He no longer felt the need to make obvious comments about their compatibility. It was evident to everyone now. 1 month after Daniel's initial proposal, Sarah made her decision. She found father and son together by the evening fire, Joseph teaching Daniel to carve a fishing hook from bone while sharing stories about his own childhood lessons. I want to stay, Sarah said without preamble, not as a guest or a temporary resident, but as family. If you'll have me. Daniel's face erupted in joy, but he looked to his father for confirmation. Joseph studied Sarah's face in the firelight, searching for any trace of uncertainty or reservation. Are you certain? He asked. There will be no going back once you commit to this path. The outside world moves quickly. A few years here and you may find yourself unable to return to your former life even if you wanted to. I'm certain, Sarah replied. I've never been more certain of anything. Joseph nodded slowly, then reached for her hand. His calloused palm was warm and steady, representing all the security and belonging she had been searching for without knowing it. 6 months later, in a simple ceremony attended by several members of Joseph's extended family, Sarah Mitchell became Sarah Running Bear, taking the name that had been Joseph's wife's before her death. Daniel beamed throughout the celebration, clutching his wooden bow and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose plan had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. As they settled into their life together, Sarah often thought about the day she had emerged from the forest, lost and desperate, into their small clearing. She had been looking for a way out of the wilderness, but instead she had found her way home. The wooden carving Daniel had made her still held a place of honor in their dwelling, but it no longer represented memory of a brief visit. Now it symbolized the moment when a broken woman, a lonely widower, and a wise child discovered that sometimes the most important questions come from the smallest voices, and that home isn't a place you find but a life you choose to build with the people who see your true value.